Thank you for inviting me, Will. And Caitlin actually gave me the invitation. She's the one that called me at first, and I did her wedding 12 years ago. I thought it was like 2 years ago, but it's 12 years ago. Did her wedding, so I've known Caitlin for a long time and her family, and know her extended family as well. So it's good to be here for her and Will as well. I'm wearing my COVID beard. Anybody else have one of those or have had one? A few of you there? Yeah. I promised my wife Rhonda it'll be gone when COVID's not influenced anymore. And it's been here longer than I anticipated. But anyway, here where we are. And I won't speak very long, but I will say I've been here twice for worship services. Once right here, which dates that. Other time was in the new sanctuary. The first time the pastor, not Will, talked about sex. That was his sermon title. The second time I was here, the associate pastor was about to announce she's moving to Africa. And so I'm kind of afraid to come. What's going to happen here today, though I might be more controlled by being the speaker myself. When we first began talking about this journey, we celebrated in a way that what's going to happen from an article called Leading Beyond the Blizzard, which was really kind of a secular/church article written by Praxis that discusses simply how things work in strange seasons. And they simply said back in March, this would go on for at least a year or a year and a half. They were right. And Will was a part of that conversation through the large church pastors. They said that this would be make much more impact than we thought, and they were right. Third thing they said was churches, when they restarted, if we want to use that terminology, meaning no longer having the influence from this virus, that it would be really new church starts is what they're going to be. It'll be so different. There'll be so many changes, so many dynamics in the journey that when they begin moving forward with no longer influenced by a virus and all that it does, it was not going to be the same. Some churches will be starting brand new like they didn't exist before COVID-19. Some would start with kind of restarting and changing and shifting. Some would be tweaking, but no church anywhere would be the same. And what I've discovered in my own journey is that large churches might be the most impacted, not necessarily by a change in who they are, but by what they're going to have to do to be effective in the work of the Church of Jesus Christ for the season to come. Please hear that. To what you're going to have to do to be effective in the call of Christ upon your church, which is to make disciples. That's pretty clear. Jesus said that. And to do that well in the next season, it's going to be a lot and require for most congregations, if not all, significant, just doing things different. Experimenting, practicing, changing, shifting, stopping, starting, and that's going to be ongoing. You've already been doing that in some ways in the season by saying, well, we have worship now, we can't have it, we can do this, we can't do that, and we're going to have to do this, we got to do it this way, and so you're already experiencing that some. We've had some of that, but the key thing is that you're going to be moving into a season where you're going to be a brand new, in some form or other, church. You're not there yet. You're getting there. You're not there yet. You won't be able to say what that's going to be until we have clarity on where churches are and who's involved, who's attending, who's connected, who's grown, who's dropped out. And that'll be when you start having church without COVID-19 being a part of it, meaning I can't come because of this disease, or we can't come because no one's letting us come, or we have to wear masks, whatever it might be. Am I making sense so far? So I want you to be on the same page with us. These are learnings across the church in the United States, across denominational lines, and certainly within our own journey as United Methodists. So we have that clearly here, and I want you to be on the same page with me where we are with that, and I work with lots of churches in these kind of conversations. Secondly, there's something I've learned in the church, and I was a pastor for a long time, 38 years as an active pastor. I was at First Mansfield for 21 years. And moved from there to working for the conference in this area of working with church growth and evangelism and mission. I've been doing that for 4 years, which is hard to believe from me. But I learned one thing. I learned where the power in churches is. It's often not what you think. It's certainly not, and the larger the church, the more likely it's true, it's certainly not in the senior leadership. It's not in the senior pastor. Now, you might think that, or somebody might think that. Sometimes members who just attend might think that, but it is not true. When it comes to significant movement, significant change, significant growth, significantly being effective in the Church of Jesus Christ's work of making disciples, it's the key leaders that really have the power. And in this case, it's you. You have the power when it comes to what the church is going to be and do. The term that's often used is the first, second, and third followers. And what that means is someone gets up, whether it be Will or someone else, and says, we've got a great idea. We think this kind of online worship is going to change the world, or we think if we do this with worship, this is going to make such a difference. If we add this, if we stop that, it's going to. When they say that, and someone's out there says, I'm with you, that's the person who has the power in a church. And the one who says, hey, we're not doing that, they've got power too. That is something that we learn as senior leaders that is so critical. And the sooner that a pastor learns that, the more likely they might have some success. Sometimes they never figure that out. They wander around thinking they actually have power to do something. I can do this. No, you can't. It's the one who says, I'm going to do it. It's the one who says yes. It's the one who celebrates, supports, and prays. It's the one who works with. It's the one who adapts and changes and processes and joins in the journey together, which is around the great strength of the church, that we have a clear-cut biblical guideline to direct us, which is we're supposed to make disciples and honor God and feed hungry people. So we all have one common thing that we agree about in the church. Almost no organization has that, but we do. It's simply sometimes just how we're going to do it. So I'm simply giving you the knowledge you have an amazing amount of power. What you say in choir practice or in band practice or in your classroom or in the hallways, what you say in the pews on Sunday morning, what you say online or at the ball game or at the restaurant, what you say about your church and what it's doing and not doing is the power of that church. When you sit in choir, I'm not sure how many choir members are here, probably one or two. Typically, leadership has lots of choir members. If you're in the choir and you say, man, they presented a great idea. If we do this, we might make a few disciples next year. Or someone might come to Christ next week, or someone hungry might be fed. What a great idea. You have exerted the power God gave you to make your church work. Now, if you sit back there and say, another stupid idea, and I'm going to have to do so-and-so, they're going to ask for money again, then you've also exerted power too, and it's not going to help anything. Now, this is a rare time to do that, but not very often. Am I making sense? Okay, you can applaud, sure, go right ahead. I don't often get applause. At home, every once in a while, at home, my wife never applauds. Not one time has she ever applauded when I walk in the door. She doesn't do that, so I don't get that. And we're at home a lot. How many are at home a lot? More so than in the past. We certainly are. But that's something that Will or just your senior leadership can't say to you. So I'm saying it to you so you can hear that. So two things. This church is going to be, already is moving toward being a new church start. However you want to phrase that, a restart, a shift, a refocus, a new movement, you're there. Now, the good news is the churches that reach the world most effectively are new churches. Because what do? They reach new people. They go beyond just taking care of our members. And the larger the church, the more likely we find ourselves caught up in taking care of our members. And that's what we do. And I served a large church for a long time, so I know what that feels like and what that is. Because there's a heavy burden there, whether it be pastoral care, which we have to do, whether it be taking care of our kids. Well, of course we provide for our children. We provide the right music and worship. Yeah, we have to do that. And you talked a lot today about the building. That just comes with the territory. I was blessed. We built a large new facility, sanctuary, educational area when I was at Mansfield. And all the air conditioning broke the year I left. So the new pastor had to raise that money. I was part of building those units, and they lasted about 15 years. And boom, 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 he got to do that. And so that was his first experience as being a senior pastor of a large church. That's part of who we are. Again, the power of an organization. to move forward into being a restart, a new church start, is that new churches reach new people the best. There are lots of reasons for that, but that's simply a fact. That's often why a church can be in a location, been there for 50 years or 100 years, or how many years has Round Rock been here? 130 years, I was guessing. That's almost usually how we began. Been there that long time. Why we're sitting here all this time, and down the road there'll be a church that built, and hey, they've got 5,000 people already coming. What happened to us? Well, new churches reach new people better. That's the nature of new church. So you have an opportunity if you can design what that is, what it looks like for you in your church. Now, I know a lot about this church because I've known the pastor. I know Will for quite a few years. I knew David. We came in the ministry together, so I've known David forever. I know the story here, know the conversations. I was part of a program called The Leading Edge, which was the pastors of the 100 largest attended Methodist churches. And this church was part of that program. White's Chapel in South Lake, if you know where that church is, was another. And First Mansfield, where I served, was also of those three. And in that time period, there were lots and lots and lots of First Round Rocks, First Mansfields, South Lake, White's Chapel. Church of the Resurrection was the largest of that bunch. And Adam Hamilton led that group and brought us together. I can name many others as well. And those churches almost all grew to be a certain size during about a 10 to 15-year period. And I need you to hear this as leaders of your church. And they grew rapidly, many times beginning in the early 90s to about the year 2011, 2012. And somewhere in that time, the growth either slowed down in those churches that were all together, growing at the same time, getting large at the same time, and it began to stop. When I was a young pastor coming in 1978, don't tell anybody, a long time ago, when I began, there weren't many large Methodist churches. There were no First Round Rocks. There were no First Mansfields. There might be a First Fort Worth or a First Houston. There were no suburban large churches like this almost anywhere. They simply did not exist. When we look for models to follow, Will, there weren't any models even to look at. They weren't out there. We learned together. Our church grew very rapidly from 95 to the year that I'm saying. We went from a few hundred in worship to 2,650 in worship over a period of about 10 years, 11, 12 years. So 2,650 when I left in 2016, when I left the church and began to work for the conference. But somewhere it changed. I remember talking to David Atkins in those years, and we talk about who had the most members join that month or that year. And he'd say, well, we had 85 join the last 2 months. And I said, well, we had 130, which is almost always the case. And we run into John McKellar, who would say, well, we had 250. So we always had John at that church who had more than we did. But we talk about it all the time. I said, what are you doing? Nothing. I'm just having church, and we're trying to build buildings and trying to make sure we have the choir in place and got you taken care of. We're just doing our program. That's all we have time to do. We were just trying to keep up with preaching a good sermon on sex. I preached on Jesus more often than I didn't preach on. I can't remember. Have I ever preached on sex, Rhonda? She says, no, I've never done that before. But you had that here. Was anybody here that day? Anybody remember that day? That's probably, 15 years ago maybe. But I'm getting back to that began to shift in the mid, 2011, 12, 15. Somewhere in there, it began to shift. And that slowed down in almost every single of our large churches like this in the United States. It began to slow down. The culture shifted. We began to move from being more of a church-centered culture to a, secular-centered culture. The next generation that came up weren't necessarily going to church as much. There were less and less Methodists coming in, certainly, so you weren't going to grow by having Methodists join your church. There were less and less of them. People started coming to church not every week, but if you ask someone if they came once a month, they think they were the best attender that you had. I come once a month. I come like 12 times a year, and that's great. That was also a shift. Not criticizing that. That's just what was one of the shifts. We all felt that all of us felt that slow down in new members, in people professing faith, in confirmation. All that began to slow down. What's going on? What's happening? What do we do now to deal with that? And all of a sudden, growing a church became stinking, praise the Lord, hard work. And it wasn't that hard before. David John Adam Hamilton we just tried to catch up with the growth. Like they got people coming, but build a building and they won't have a place to sit. You got to do it. I mean, we better get this program going for the young people. What are we going to do with all these kids that are falling out the windows? We got to have a place for them, and they got to have a youth director. We got to pay staff, and now we got to have somebody that's going to play the band. We have to do. I know I'm talking fast. I do that. That's my curse, or the curse of those who hear me. But that's my nature to do that. But that all shifted, and many times churches did not shift. So churches like First Fort Worth went from 2,000 in worship to 900. Now they're growing again by adding some new things that you never thought they would add. By changing stuff you never thought First Fort Worth would change. By creating new worship opportunities you never imagined they would offer. Because they have to, or they would die. First Houston's trying to survive today because they had a more difficult time changing, adjusting and adapting. Are you hearing me? What I'm saying now is we have an opportunity we would not have had because it is hard to refocus an existing ministry church operating a certain way, which is around programs usually, activities, structures that we operate, committee systems, and all those things. That's how we work. And to change that is hard to do, but we have an opportunity because it's changed for us. Hardly anyone's connected to your church the way they did a year ago. The patterns are already, in most places, and surely here, are shattered. The expectations are, I don't remember even what I did in church last year. Did I go every Sunday? Was I part of a class? I mean, these things sometimes are not there anymore. Some have been added, new things are being done. Again, many are worshiping online. They did not before. These are all shifts that are happening. We have to decide, are we going to be able to gather, and every church is going to see this as an opportunity, because if it had not come, churches like Round Rock were probably going to continue. I won't say you were struggling, but you were going to. You weren't growing like you were 8 years ago, were you? Anybody have been along and remember that? When we can't keep up baptizing everybody. Where are we going to put all these confirmation kids? We were doing that. I quit having people come to the front to join the church. You can't have 30 people join the church at one time. I had a Sunday morning time to join the church when I had been there 6 months where 120 people joined the church one Sunday. That does not happen in Methodist churches hardly anywhere anymore. And it wouldn't happen today if First Mansfield tried it. It wouldn't work because they're not there to join. You have to do it. So I'm simply focusing on a change you've already experienced and know in this community and your church for lots of reasons. New church starts are part of that because they're everywhere now. Is there any large church around you that started new in the last 15, 20 years? Yes, I know there are many of them. One's a Methodist church. So you have that. I won't go into all the details of why the change has happened. I'm simply pointing out that it has. It's reality and it's a truth. So one of the things, and I know I'm a keynote speaker, but I'm more of a teacher in these types, so I'm not necessarily preaching at you and trying not to do that. But one of the things that I found that is very helpful, that I leave something concrete with you that may something you want to do this year, next year, the following year, and I have the details for that as a resource if you choose to do that, is what I call a ministry, mission, budget, person audit. What I mean by that audit is, what are we doing? If I asked many of you, what does your church do? You would say, well, I'm part of these two things, so I know they do that. We have church every Sunday, sometime online, sometime not. We do that. Or we feed for somebody. Every church has a feeding program, but you wouldn't know every detail. What does your staff do? What do you ask them to do? What do you require them to do? What do you expect them to do? What do they do? What does this program accomplish? How many programs do you have? What do they cost? How do you use your buildings? How do you use your sanctuary space? How is this space? This is a great space, by the way. Many churches would love to have a second space of this size. What do we do with it? Does it all fit together? Hear me, please. I'm just trying to help a little bit. Does it all fit together around the mission we have as a church? And what is our mission? Does it do that? Does it accomplish that? You know, and so we have to answer those questions. There was a time we didn't have to. It'd be okay. We'll just do everything. We'll do it all. It'll be fine. Everybody's coming in the door, and we can't keep up anyway. And these churches like this, because the community was growing, we're just trying to keep up with the growth and people coming in the door and getting a place for them. This place was packed when we came years ago. They had the sermon on sex. I don't know if I learned anything or not, but I did pay attention. I can't say I always pay attention, but I paid attention that day. So I know David a long time, so I can imagine. But anyway, distracted myself from this. But now we have to say we don't have the leisure to do that anymore. We find ourselves we got to raise enough money to pay all this stuff, pay for all the stuff we're doing. Is the stuff we're doing accomplishing the mission of our church? And what is that mission? Why did God plant us here? Why do we exist? Is it for me so I can enjoy the things in church that I enjoy? And we all have that. Rhonda and I love to go to church now. When we leave, we either compliment or criticize the sermon. We know how to do that now much better than I did when I was a pastor. Oh, that was really good. No, that wasn't so good. We can do that. We know how to do that. That music was great. Or, well, I don't know about that song. I don't even know that. We can do that like everybody else can now that we're attending church rather than leading a church. So I know what that's like. But are we actually accomplishing the mission? And do we know what that mission is? Is it someone coming in and professing faith in Jesus Christ for the first time, having their heart and life transformed and changed? Is it someone who finds themselves recovering from a broken life, whether that brokenness is because of addiction or just living in the same world you and I live in? Is it that? Is it a child baptized who comes in the door who now is going to be led and cared for by a church that's going to help them know what it is to love God and be loved by God in their life? Is that our mission? Is the mission making sure that no one within 10 miles of this church gets up in the morning and doesn't have something for breakfast? Is that what our mission is? What is our mission? And is our programs, our budget, our endowment fund, our ministries, our committees aimed at that? And I can ask you a question that will help you see if it is or if it isn't. And you decide it. I'm not going to decide it for you. And don't answer it in public. That's for you to decide privately in your group. When your committee meets or group meets, whether it be the team, first leadership team, I think I heard that term, whether it's a finance committee or a PBR committee, does those committees ever talk about professions of faith in Jesus Christ? Do they talk about the disciples we're making? They talk about the hungry people that are fed. Do they talk about the mission of the church, or simply talk about the process, make sure the vote's correct, the I is dotted, the T is crossed? It's hard not to do that, and that has value. Churches have to operate. They have to work a certain way. We have to be careful about money. But do these groups talk about the mission and vision of the church that defines what you do? When you work as a trustee, do you talk about the building in relation to those who are coming, who are going to come, we're trying to reach, those who need Christ, those who need to be fed, those who need to become disciples, those that need recovery? Do you talk about those people in those meetings? Well, typically churches don't do that at all. It's not simply part of the system, and the system doesn't lean itself to doing that. But I found that we have to. It changes how we do a budget. It changes how we think about a building and operate a building. Tell you many stories. I don't have time to do that, but sometimes churches build buildings, and we built a new sanctuary there, and I had my administrator, and I love her. We worked together really well for a long time, but she wanted to put no signs everywhere there was. No this, no that, don't do this, don't bring that. She wanted to protect the building. I said, the building's not to be protected. It's for those that need Christ. Those signs cannot stay on the sanctuary doors that say, no, 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 no. Not saying you do that here. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not trying to criticize that. The building is not to be protected from the people we're trying to reach. If they spill coffee, it's too bad. So we built an additional building that's a chapel, a little smaller than this, and I said, let's put brown carpet on the floor. Nobody's going to question the spills. It'll be the same color as coffee to begin with. You can't mess it up. It's just for the people. That's an illustration, not an expectation or recommendation. Simply a illustration that trustees talk about the people we're trying to reach. We know we are especially moving forward when we're not just talking about our members we're trying to keep happy. I want my church to keep me happy. I told our pastor, we attend Mansfield Steel, told him one time, we didn't know what's going on sometime. If you just communicate a little bit better, we know what was happening. And as a member now who attends the church on occasion, I found that's important. He said, yeah, I get that. And so I had expectations. But the church is not about me. It's about the people we're trying to reach. So I'm going to make this next phrase, which I think is critical today, and I'm trying to watch my watch here, that the future of the post-COVID-19 church is not going to be reactivating dropouts. It's going to be reaching new people. I'm talking about the future. I'm not saying that's not important or a value. It's just not the future. It's not the growth you need or want. It's not creating professions of faith or making disciples. Energy that goes there is probably not going to create the future your church wants. And churches are going to have to refocus on how are we going to reach new people in an area where we're surrounded by how many people within a large, these kind of churches, you can go 15, 20 miles from here, but certainly 10 in that area. Is there 1 million, 500,000? I don't know, but there's a lot. If you look at those numbers, they're a terrific number of people. Many of those people are new. Many are unchurched. Many do not attend church. Many have dropped out of church. And during this season, many have just simply dropped out of the whole Christian thing entirely. They dropped out. They don't connect anymore because of political infighting or fighting over COVID, how we're going to do that, or simply not going to church, or simply because they're afraid, or whatever reason they're not attending. So the people out there to reach are overwhelming number of people. When you begin designing your future, how are we going to address bringing those people into the life of our church in a variety of ways? And I don't have time to talk about all those ways. I have lots of resources that help churches understand what they might be. But how are we going to do that? And I'll give you one illustration. And again, not a recommendation or expectation, it's simply an illustration that I think could be of value to some churches. That online worship now is kind of a much bigger thing than it was. We have a meeting with people online attending it. That would not have happened for most congregations a year ago, if any of them, and it's happening now. So we know how to do that. That's new for many of us to transition to that, build a program around that, to begin buying the equipment to do that, and hiring staff to help us make that happen. Thank you, staff. These folks sweat constantly. They sweated before COVID. Now they sweat twice as much because they're working twice as hard, keeping up with it. So you know that. So we have that in place. But one way to think, but right now we simply provide online worship typically to just keep up with our members and those who've, not able to attend in person for whatever reason, if you're having in person at all. So you have that. Think about online stuff, whether it be worship, groups, outreach, as a tool to reach new people. Think about online as a tool to reach new people. Think about it in terms of evangelism. Anybody ever heard the word evangelism before? A few of you? We don't use it very much in the Methodist Church, but hey, it's in the Bible. And so we think about that as a tool to reach new people, which actually changes what online worship or outreach looks like. It doesn't look the same if you do that. It's designed around the person not yet attending your church instead of around the person who is. That's different. And that would mean in-person stuff is designed around making disciples, worshiping God, and building relationships. That's what in-person stuff's about. This is where we can really connect, because we have learned we can do hybrid stuff, meaning online. We also have learned you really can't have church without being in person. It's just not the same. You just can't. You can't connect together. You can't grow together. You can't build each other's lives the way you want to. You can't love each other like you want to. You can't even hug anybody. You know, these things, you have to be in person. It has to be in person. So that's hybrid, quickly in a nutshell. And that is a future, and that's a shift, and that's a change, and everybody's required to cooperate with that when that begins to happen if you choose to do it that way. I think that's a model that might work, and we're learning that in this COVID-19 season. So I wanted to bring that up as well. I say I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go on much further, but we've got to define who's on the team, who is really in this story together, influencers, members, you, staff. How do we see ourselves that way, that really are committed to the mission? That's who's on the team. Those committed to the mission. Those who aren't committed to the mission aren't on the team, even if they are in the group, even if they're sitting at a table or, you know, on a committee. Does that make sense to you? If you're on a football team and don't care about winning, you may have a uniform, but you're not really on the team, you won't be on there very long, on football anyway, because they know exactly what they want to do. They want to score touchdowns. Now, the more we know we want to make disciples, the more we can see, are we on the team together? Are we all committed to the common mission? Do we really want to, in the nutshell, create growth in our church? And that is going to have to happen for churches for many reasons. What opportunities exist now that did not exist a year ago? There are many of them. What are they? What did we learn that allows their new and existing churches have opportunities you did not have a year ago by far? And the larger the church, the more you have, if you have the time and space to do that. Hence the audit. If you're all locked up with everything already filled, every hour already filled, every dollar already spent, you know, every person already aimed, every staff person already committed, then you can't do those new opportunities. You either have to add new people and new space or change what people are doing, which always creates a little bit of sometimes just change. So that's how that works. Are you building in this season a spiritual core? The one thing we can do the same is we can still grow in our faith together, our love for Christ, our commitment to the cause that God's put in our hearts that brought us to church in the first place, brought us to Christ in the first place, and why we said yes to being in a team in the church that you are on and are part of today. It's creating a culture of growth. Most churches have a culture of maintenance. We maintain what we have, which is hard work. And I understand this. I served a large church a long time. I know exactly what it's like. And the larger we are, the more we maintain what we got and how we got here. And as time goes on, we begin losing that. And again, I pointed out how 10 years or so ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, depending on the congregation, things began slowing down, sometimes to a declining point. And we really found ourselves having in a conference that had a handful of really rapidly growing large churches, having really none that are growing. Some are maintaining where they've been, but no one's been growing at the level that we had. I could spend an hour talking about the changes that created that. There's no one to blame. It's simply a change that naturally took place, creating that culture of growth. Well, I'll close with this and open it for questions. It's always going to be, it will never change. It's always been true, will always be true, that it's the new that reaches new people. It's the new that reaches new people. Existing groups, existing communities of faith have great difficulty reaching new people because they can't connect with people who've been together for a long time who can't necessarily make room for them even if they try. But new people, that's why new churches grow. They're all new. They all know new people, and they bring new people in, and it grows really fast. And you had some of that experience here. The church began growing around 94, 93, 95. That started happening here. You experienced that here, but you don't anymore, probably. Certainly not the level you did then. That's always going to be true. The new reaches the new. If you don't have new, if you don't have a next step for everyone, a new person should walk in the door and always have a next step. What's the step I take? Now, I have 3 stories I could tell. I'm not going to because I don't have time, so I won't tell the stories. They're funny. I think they're great, but and I'm sorry I left out my funny stories. I like to tell funny stories. I do that. I wouldn't be able to see you laugh, and half of you would, but I don't have time to tell those stories. So I'll leave them out. I'll tell them my wife Rhonda on the way home. And she'll say, thank you for telling that story again for the 50th time. She's very good at looking at me like I've heard that before. Sometimes she even points out that she's heard it before. Not always. Sometimes she doesn't. Depends on how early in the morning it is. Okay. Questions? If you don't have any, that's fine. I said a lot of things, I know, and offered a lot of stuff. And any questions? Yes. What do you think? It was. And it was Katie who's moved to Africa. So that's what she's doing very good there. Seems to enjoy it in the ministry and doing amazing things and dealing with COVID in Africa, which are handling it better than America does for some reason. You'll have to decide that why that's the case. Other questions? And I don't expect any questions really, but many questions you need to ask, you probably need to ask Will. So, and because he's, okay, I'm gonna let it go then.